right.
And it is being recorded.
Do I have the ability to share my screen?
Uh, Melanie, our media consultant, is on there. I would think that you do.
Okay, I just sent her a request for it. Let me
Okay.
see.
Okay. Just work through her on that.
I clicked allow, so it should be.
Okay, let me.
We have 12 participants, by the way.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Can everybody see that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go make it larger here. There we go. Can
Yeah.
everybody?
Yeah. That's better.
Okay, good. All right, so first, this is not on the first page. There we go. All right. So, some of you I've met, some of you I haven't yet, but as Ron said, I do work with the children's and as the children's and youth ministry consultant for BCMD. And so part of that, my job in that role has been helping churches in their setting up safety systems for their ministries in their church, helping them with policies and procedures, reporting practices, all of the things. And so I've done a lot of workshops for some of your churches where it's kind of a 45-minute workshop. I give you a big overview on those 5 things that we as a state convention set up that we have deemed that make safe churches: training, screening, reporting, protecting, and caring. And so tonight we're going to dive a little bit more in depth into one of those specific areas, protect, which is where our policies and procedures live under that value. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know I'm pretty sure everyone's aware of the bylaw changes that BCMD made, that in order to be part of BCMD, you have to have some of these things in place. So we've really been doing a lot of work lately with churches and helping them pull out those policies and procedures. Maybe they don't even have anything on paper that they're doing. It's all in their head right now, and helping them get that on paper, getting things up to date, getting people trained on what is actually in that document, and making sure that document is a living document, meaning gets looked at every single year by a team of people to update it and to make sure that it's staying front and center in everyone as far as they do ministry. And so I tend to think of safety in ministry as the foundation. We build so many wonderful, great ministries in our churches, but if it's not built upon a foundation of safety and something happens in our church, all of those ministries and hard work kind of goes out the window and falls by the wayside. So I really see safety as um, a cornerstone in our churches and our ministry, and everything is kind of built out. Ministries are built out from that. So tonight we are going to I'm going to give you kind of an overview of policies and procedures. We're going to talk about um, some things that should be in them. So if you have your policies with you, that can be something you can be looking through and saying, yes, we have that, we don't have that, we need this. Maybe your document hasn't been looked at in 10 years, and then you're in the right spot so that we can get that brought up to date and current. And then we're going to switch it over into, if you do have a good document, how do you review it annually? What are the things you need to look at every year in that document? So we're going to walk through that. And I think in the chat, she shared the download for the Policies and Procedures Annual Review Guide. So we'll talk about that. If you don't have it in front of you, that's okay. I'm going to pull it up on the screen and we'll talk through it together. But then we'll finish with that and then can take any questions that you might have on just policies and procedures in general or how to review that. So be able to answer those questions for you. But let's jump right into it. If I can. Okay, there we go. Okay, so policies and procedures, just some general overview of what they are. They're meant to protect multiple facets of our ministry. They protect the people that we serve in our ministry. They protect the people that serve in those ministries. They protect the church as a whole. And they protect the ministries themselves. So lots of times we think of policies and they're just there to protect kids, but actually it's in our best interest to protect a vast array of things: children, volunteers, leaders, the church itself, the ministries themselves. And in the past, I think it's always been thought of as we have to protect the church. We have to protect the church. If something were to happen, the church would be sued and our church would be no more. However, I like to think of it if we flip that around and we make our first priority protecting those we serve. And when we do that really well, everything else falls into place. Inevitably, we're going to be protecting the church, and we're going to be protecting our volunteers, and we're going to be protecting our ministries. Um, so most of the times churches update policies only when something goes wrong. They're like, oh no, our policy didn't work, or we didn't have a policy for that, so it wasn't being followed. So when we take a look at our policies, get a good solid document working, and then review it every single year, we start to build this culture of safety that remains front and center in everything that we do. And it's stewardship, it's discipleship, and it's care all combined into one thing. So if we take a little bit more look at policies, they can also serve as a deterrent themselves. And when I say that, I mean, if somebody comes to your church and is seeking access to children or vulnerable people, and they say they want to serve in your ministries, and they get handed a updated policy document that's relevant and that is current, and they can see all of the things that they can and cannot do, sometimes that can be a deterrent right then and there, and they'll go somewhere else where somebody has no document or no policies, or it hasn't been updated in years. So also, having that document is important for a lot of reasons. It gives us a level of accountability. It gives us a way to say, hey, this is why we do what we do. It allows us to have difficult conversations and not be the bad guy. I spoke with a lady at a church actually in Tennessee this morning, and she was trying to find out how to have a hard conversation with a volunteer that something came back on their background check that was going to make it disqualify them from serving. And if they had had something in their policy that said, hey, these are the things when they come back on your background check that will disqualify you from serving, then the onus doesn't lie on her shoulders. She's relying on the policies. Well, this is what it says, and I'm following the policy. Also, having that document, lots of times for legal and insurance purposes, they want to see the actual document. And so it's important for those reasons as well. Now, I know in a lot of the work we've been doing and in the time I've been here at BCMD, I get lots of phone calls that say, we don't really have a good, solid policy. Do you have a good one that we can look at? And there's never a reason that we should start from scratch. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. And there are sample policies that we can send you and that we do send out. But know that you can't just change the name on the top of the policy and call it good to go. You really need to look through that sample document and see what fits your church, what doesn't fit your church. There may be a van policy in there, and you don't even have a church van, so that doesn't need to be in there. So making sure that they are tailored to your specific church, your specific content. Especially as we talk about updating them from year to year, as we add ministries, as we take ministries away, as we make additions to our building, physical additions, those are things we need to look at and make us to have policies that are tailored to our church. And so another thing that policies and procedures should be written with is an understanding of how the predators push boundaries and groom people within the stage of groups that you're serving. So usually people who are seeking access to children or students, what they'll do is they'll come in if the barriers are set very low. First thing they'll do is start to groom us as the adults, and make us think that they're kind, that they're helpful, that they're trustworthy. And then they express a need to or a desire to serve in our ministries. And we give them access based upon a screening system, whatever that system may be. The more robust a system is, the easier we can weed people out. But then lots of people make it through those screening processes that have ill intentions. And so once they're serving in ministry, our policies need to be set up in a way that we can recognize grooming when it happens and see that as a boundary violation, as a policy violation, and then remove people from ministry as we see them breaking policies. For example, one of the grooming habits that we see once someone selects a child is to start to give them individual gifts, trying to win their affection, their trust, their loyalty. So if you have a policy in your document that says we don't allow any leader to give children or students individual gifts, that way, should somebody start to do that and it is brought to the attention of somebody to say, hey, we don't allow you to do this. Our policy doesn't allow this. Hopefully, it could be stopped before actual abuse occurs. So, knowing those grooming habits and making sure our policies are kind of rooted in that process and has things in that process. That's where the two adult rule comes into play. Most of abuse cases happen in one-on-one situations. So, if we can avoid that with our policies, we can be in better shape there. And then our policies and procedures shouldn't be just a document that live on the shelves in the pastor's office somewhere. Every year we talk about looking at them, reviewing them, but also all of your staff and volunteers before they start serving, they should have their eyes on that document. And I always recommend the very last page of the document be something that they sign that says, I have read these policies and procedures and I agree to abide by them as I serve in ministry, and they sign and date it. They keep a copy of the policies, and then you keep that signed document for their records so that you can say, should anything ever happen, you can say, look, here's our policies. They signed and agreed to them on this date, and we have documentation of that. So I always recommend that leadership, staff, volunteers do that before they start to serve. However, it's important that they do that after they've been trained in sexual abuse awareness. And there's a reason for that. Oftentimes, if there's no training beforehand and they see a document, they may not understand why some of those policies and procedures are in place. So if they've never been trained on abuse prevention to know, hey, this is what the grooming pattern looks like, then when they see that document with the we don't allow people to give individual gifts, without knowing those grooming patterns or how those predators work, they may think that's a silly or stupid policy to have and they don't understand it. So more than likely, they probably wouldn't follow it. So having those policies are important, and the training beforehand really makes sure that they follow your policies, and it gives them a better understanding of your policies in general. And then making sure that they're quote unquote trained on your policies, whether that's in the interview process with them, you go through your policies and say, here are the policies that we have. Do you have any questions? But also part of your policies, you should have in there a response plan for should something happen in our church, what exactly do we do step by step? And in that case, volunteers need to know what the plan is so that they can follow the plan. Most of the times in our policy documents, what I typically see is, well, we respond to abuse by calling this number, and that's all they'll say. But really, when something happens or a volunteer suspects abuse, whether it's from somebody within the church or they suspect it from something might be happening outside of the church, there's lots of decisions that have to be made more than just making the one phone call. And so sitting down and building a plan on how they make that decision, what the process is important. And a lot of times, policies and procedures and response plans, especially in small churches, fall on the pastor's shoulders. And so pastors have a ton of things to do. So if you can have a solid policy document, a solid response plan, almost like a fire escape plan, it makes you able, the pastor, to be freed up to do the things that they were called to do. So we talked about the annual review. We'll get into that in just a little bit more. And any changes that you make in the review, obviously communicated to your staff and volunteers. So I recommend for churches, usually when we talk about abuse prevention, it's overwhelming. It either falls, like I said, on the pastor's shoulders or on the children's ministry leader's shoulders. So I recommend that churches kind of recruit for a child safety coordinator. It could be the kids ministry leader, it could be the youth leader, but this is just somebody who leads this child safety committee, which doesn't have to be a big committee. I've listed some of the people that could be on that committee, but those people are the ones that are responsible for every year taking a look at your policies and procedures, having some verbal say into them, going through the annual review together, and then updating those policies and getting the changes communicated out to staff. So a child safety coordinator is somebody who kind of leads the charge in your church. Doesn't have to be the kids ministry leader, but they are the champions of your church's culture of safety and the main point of contact for reporting in that response plan. So child safety committee could be made up of a couple people. They all should be screened. It could be made up of, obviously, your child safety coordinator should be on there. Could be the pastor, the associate pastor, a deacon chair. It's a good idea to have a parent on there so that their voice can be heard. If you have know of a survivor that may feel comfortable doing this, it's very good to have their voice and perspective brought in on your policies. And then you may involve the youth leader, the kids ministry leader, maybe even any other ministries that you have, the women's ministry leader, or if you lead Awana or things like that, and they have separate leaders to have them involved and be a part of this as well. So I know this is really kind of small print, but this is kind of almost like a checklist on some things that should be included in your policy. And I'm more than happy, Ron, to send these slides to you all so that you can send them out if you want. But I'll just kind of go through them kind of quickly. So in your policy and procedure document, one of the first things that you should have is an overview of your safety system. And when I say safety system, I talk about what is your screening process? How do you train people? So that should be kind of first and foremost in your policy. So this is how we screen anybody who wants to serve with kids and students. So that should be first in your policy. And having a statement on abuse tolerance, a zero tolerance for abuse, defining some of the definitions of abuse. This lays out very clearly what your policy is trying to prevent. And then a lot of times I see policies leave out the enforcement of policies and the consequences. So they may say, here are all the things you can't do, but what it doesn't say is if you're caught doing one of those things, there's no, then what happens next? So it could be as simple as a statement as if anyone is caught or if anyone is found to be violating any of these policies, it could be grounds for removal from children's ministry, student ministry. But having the violation of policies and what those consequences are, again, takes the onus off of you from having a hard situation, a hard conversation. It just basically says, this is what our policy says, and we are following our policy. So it should have a plan to report abuse. That's that reporting plan that I was talking about, a response plan, both internally and externally. It should list some worker to child ratios, meaning for every 5 kids we have in a room, we're going to have 2 adults, or every 20 youth in a room, we're going to have 2 adults. The 2 deep rule, some people call it 2 deep rule, some people call it 2 adult rule. Making sure that is definitely part of your policy. Married couples serving together. I love when married couples want to serve together. However, there can be a little bit of risk involved in that. And in fact, some of the insurance companies are a little bit hesitant to have that happen. However, I think there can be goodness in married couples serving together. It's good for kids and students to see healthy families serving in ministry together. So if there is married couples that want to serve together in your ministry, I encourage you to add another set of eyes with them, whether that's a youth volunteer that serves with them or a third person. Many reasons for married couples not serving together. In a court of law, technically, they don't have to testify against each other. So we have that spousal privilege law in the state of Maryland. And just married couples serving together in a what if scenario could be if there's abuse happening in the home and they're serving together, and one of the spouse sees something inappropriate happening, from whatever's happening at home, they may not feel comfortable putting a stop to what they see or reporting what they see. Um, Having a discipline policy is good to be in there. It doesn't have to be detailed, but it should just say, hey, this is our discipline policy that we follow in our ministries. And when I say discipline policy, I'm meaning for children and for students. Like at what point do we need to pull a parent in? At what point do we need to, contact the pastor? Restroom policies for each age group should be in there. That's a basic policy that should be included. Acceptable and unacceptable physical touch of minors. Unfortunately, we have to lay it out for people. So yes, you can high five, you can side hug, all of those things, but no, you may not have like full on frontal hugs. You may not, typically, we shouldn't have children sitting on our lap if they're over the age of 5, no horseplay, excessive tickling, things like that. So we should have a section in our policy that just lays out, here's what you can and what you can't do. Because oftentimes they'll say, well, the policy never said I couldn't do that. So making sure we lay that out. Transportation policies. I tend to be in favor of treating transportation with children and minors the same as the 2 adult rule, having 2 adults transfer, at least 2 adults when we're transporting children and students. Um, Alcohol and tobacco policies, it may seem like, well, yeah, we don't really need to tell people they can't bring alcohol on our church campus or things like that. However, we do know especially with our youth, that can be seen as a way that people will groom our students, offering them access to alcohol and tobacco. And so just making sure that that's not acceptable and that's a grounds for dismissal from ministry. Um, Especially in this day and age, cell phone and camera usage with our volunteers. I know our volunteers love to take pictures of what they're doing in ministry, but many times our parents of children don't always want their kids' pictures on social media or on another adult's cell phone. So having some guidelines in our policies of how people, when they're serving in your ministry, how they can and cannot use their cell phone. And I don't recommend that volunteers are allowed to photograph children or students while they're serving. We talked about the gift giving policy. Moving over onto the other side, social media and internet policies. That's really big as far as what people who serve in our ministry, what they can and can't post on their social media. Parent involvement and observation. Sometimes we have parents that want to stay with their children through the entire ministry, meaning they want to sit next to them for the entire Sunday school, or they want to sit next to them through the entire Awana program. And so having a policy in there that says, you can do that 2 times. After that, if you want to continue doing that, we're going to have you go through our screening procedure just like everybody else, because they may be there in support of their child, but they inevitably end up acting as a volunteer when they sit in that classroom for the entire time. Having a part of our policies address sexually oriented conversations and materials. Again, this goes back to that grooming process, especially with our students. We know that that is something that is done to groom, especially middle school and high school students. They will start to show them pictures, inappropriate pictures, whether it's on a phone, and see how far they can push boundaries with somebody in that grooming process. So having a policy around that is big. And when I say a policy, it could be something as simple as 2 sentences. It doesn't need to be an entire page of policy on just that. Verbal interactions, what it's okay to say to children and what it's not okay to say. A check-in, check-out system, that's usually standard in every policy. Youth volunteers, what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. For a long time, I would always have youth volunteers be the ones to take kids to the bathroom. And looking back now, that's a big no-no. And so what can youth volunteers do and what can they not do? Supervision of ministry staff and volunteers, how they're monitored as they're serving. How do you identify your staff and volunteers? Do they wear a lanyard? Do they wear a name tag some way so that adults can recognize who else in the area is screened and who is not? Taking attendance is something that I kind of thought wasn't very important, but it is really important, especially in the fact now that we have Maryland has lifted the statute of limitations back in October of 2023, meaning people can come back now and say abuse from years and years ago. And if we start to making sure that we're taking attendance, we can go back then and say, well, that person was or was not even here at that time. So attendance, while it can seem redundant or a meaning like something that takes time is important. And so some of it is just documenting who's in the room during ministry on what day can be helpful for us. Allergies, health guidelines, don't bring your kids if they've got fever, green stuff coming out of their nose. That's usually typical in policies. Special events. A lot of people ask, what about volunteers for special events? Do they need to go through the full screening process? Something to consider as you think about special events. Off-site events, if you're going to sleepaway camp, you're taking kids up to Skycroft. How do they get there? What are the policies surrounding that? Bullying, we know that bullying can also be a grooming pattern especially in peer-to-peer abuse, which is children who abuse other children. Oftentimes it will start out as bullying. And so having a clear policy and no tolerance policy for bullying could prevent some peer-to-peer abuse from happening. Then your general building safety, fire escape, lockdown, if any of that happens, what's our plan? Intoxicants, we kind of talked about that with the alcohol and tobacco policies. Um, Medications, a lot of kids have allergies, and so what are your volunteers allowed to administer? What are they not allowed to administer? If there's a child that has an EpiPen, who is the one that gives that? Who's CPR trained, who's not? And then lastly, overnight events. Whether you're doing lock-ins, where's everybody going to sleep? Who's going to be, how many adults are going to be monitoring that? How exactly does that happen? So, and again, you may not need all of these policies because you may not do overnight events. You may not do off-site events or special events or transport children or students anywhere. So those wouldn't be policies that you would need. But this is just kind of a general overview of some things that should be in your policy. So if your entire policy is on one page, obviously we may be missing some things. So, and the goal is not to also create a policy that's 50 pages long, that somebody's not going to want to sit down and read. So usually the sample policy that we send out, and I'm more than happy to send out the one that we send out, and you can disseminate it amongst you all, and that way you have one to compare what you're doing now with this one if you want, and pick up some of that language that's in there if you need it. Well, I just need this part, or I don't need that part, or I need to add this piece into our policy is a good way to do that. So before I kind of jump into let me stop sharing my screen. Before the review, was there any questions, just general policy questions? Maybe you came tonight and you don't have any policies, or you had other questions regarding policies. Okay, I'm going to keep going. With our last 15 minutes, I'm going to go over this annual review. So if you do have a policy and procedures document, maybe it hasn't been looked at in years. How do we do an annual review? This is a great document that can guide you through that process. So whether you're the one reviewing it or you do have a little team of people that you include, your youth leader, your kids ministry leader, a parent, helpful to have all those voices in on that annual review. And this would be kind of where your child safety team comes into play, and they would sit down at a set time and use this document along with your policies and procedures document, and they would walk through it. So can you see all of it on the screen, or is it cut off a little bit? There you go. Can you see it all now? You can't see. Can you see it at all? Okay.
Just part of it.
You can only see part of it? Let me see if I can make it smaller.
Most, yeah.
Can you see it all there?
Are there 4 points? Let me see. We can't see 5. We can see 4.
Oh, okay. I'll
Here you go.
scroll
Now we
up.
can see them all. Yep.
Yeah, just
Okay.
scroll.
Just scroll
Okay.
up.
Yep. Okay. So taking a look at this document, and this is what she put in the chat that you can download and print out. It lists on the top a review date. This is the date that you're sitting down to review your policies. Who is the lead reviewer and who's attending and reviewing this policy. So it's going to break it down into 4 sections for you. And this first one is leadership, legal, and administrative updates. So we'll just go through these and I'll chime in some things as to why each one is kind of important. So first you'll want to ask yourself, have you had any staffing, leadership, or church hierarchy changes that require updates? So maybe your kids ministry person point of contact has changed in the last year, and the policy says, if you suspect abuse, you need to contact Kris Buckman. Well, Kris Buckman is no longer there. So that would be a change that you would need to make. And I usually recommend, rather than putting people's names in there, that you just put their role and position so that every time that changes, you don't have to go back and change your document. So making sure you change any of those things. So you can check, nope, we've had no changes, or yeah, we have had some changes, or we need to look at that. Maybe you don't have anybody in there as a point of contact. Maybe, like I mentioned, your how you handle an abuse case in your church or suspected abuse happening outside of the church. Maybe your policy right now just says call this number. Well, who calls the number? At what point do we let the pastor know, hey, we're going to make this report? The pastor should probably know about that. So thinking through one of those things of reporting structures, supervision, it may be, hey, if we have a 2 deep rule and if somebody doesn't show up for their volunteer session, you need to go and find the children's ministry coordinator and let them know that you are out of compliance with the policy. You only have 1 person, you need a second, and they can find somebody. So just making sure you have the structures correct in there. Have our insurance provider or coverage requirements changed? So it's not too often that churches change insurance providers, but it is kind of often that they may change coverage requirements. Part of our church's liability insurance usually includes what's called SAM coverage, which is sexual abuse and molestation coverage. And if you look in the very fine print, they probably have some guidelines that you as a church should be following in order to stay in compliance with that coverage. It may be having policies and procedures. It may be running background checks on everyone. It might even say you have to give everybody sexual abuse awareness training. The things that they're requiring are getting stricter because most states are eliminating that statute of limitations, which means the liability for insurance opens much, much wider now. So they're really honing in on who they're covering, making sure that they're really doing their due diligence and preventing this from happening in the first place. So reaching out to your insurance company and just saying, hey, has anything changed? Are we following the requirements we're supposed to be following? Do we have everything? Are we doing everything that they say we should be doing in order to keep our coverage should something happen? Same with your legal counsel. If you've changed legal counsel, do they want to see a copy of your policy? Some of them say no, some of them say yes. So that's something that you can list there. Have any local, state, or federal laws changed related to mandatory reporting? So that's something that you can look into. I did have an instance where one of the counties, I forget which county it was, recently updated their phone number. So, and that's just a matter of going in there. Usually in Maryland, they require you to report based on the county that the abuse occurred in. So, looking up that number, making sure the number is still the same as it was last year, because that's not something you want to find out in the middle of an emergency. So making sure that's updated. Kind of sort of falls in line with number 5. Any emergency contact numbers or reporting phone numbers, have they changed at all? Is important. So moving on to this second section, facilities, programming, and operations. Number 6 refers to say you moved where the kids ministry meets. Maybe they were downstairs. Now they're meeting upstairs, but has your building or property undergone any kind of changes that affect how or where ministries meet? Maybe you were a church plant and now you're meeting in a building. Just to give you an example, if your ministry moves where it's meeting, how does that affect what bathrooms people use? We had the church that I was at, we had individual stall bathrooms in between every classroom. So the kids, we had a bathroom policy for those bathrooms, but if they were full, which happened a lot, especially during VBS, they would have to use the bathrooms in the foyer, which any adult could use. So we had a different policy for those bathrooms. So thinking through, has our building changed? Did we add a wing that has new access doors to it? Is there anything we need to do regarding that? And sort of along the same line, number 7, have we added any new ministries or programs or activities? I had a church call just a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, we are looking at starting a youth mentoring program. What are some of the policies that we should have in place regarding the program? And there were lots of things to consider. How and where can a youth meet one-on-one with a student? Are there things that the parents should agree to and sign off on? So have you added ministries that may require new policies, or maybe you got rid of a ministry and so you don't need a policy that's associated specifically with that ministry anymore? Have transportation practices changed? Maybe you recently bought a church van. Maybe you got rid of a church van. Maybe now you are taking kids off campus somewhere and you're transporting kids to bowling or wherever you may go. And that's new. So thinking through how exactly you're going to do that is important. Have we updated emergency procedures? Severe weather lockdowns? Maybe something happened and you're like, ooh, we need to reevaluate how we get kids out if there's a fire. Thinking through some of those things. Do we have plans for those in place? Safety training and compliance is the next section you want to look over your policies for. And this is just making sure that you are following through with the screening procedures that you have set up. Is everyone up to date on their background checks? And do you have documentation of that you could easily put your hands on? Our volunteer screening and onboarding process, are you actually following? If it says in your policy that everyone completes an application, does a background check, we call references and we do an interview, do you have proof of all of those things happening? Making sure that those are all up to date, and making sure they're being followed, consistency, that you're still doing those. You may look at those and go, oh yeah, I forgot. We're supposed to be interviewing new volunteers and we haven't done that for the last 5 volunteers. So making sure, it keeps accountability for what you say you're doing. Are all staff and volunteers required safety and abuse prevention training? Maybe that's not something that you have. Again, I really feel like that's kind of foundational, especially to your policies and procedures document. Maybe you're doing that. I typically require that happens for volunteers every 3 years. Not something they have to do every single year, but at least every 3 years. And so if that is your case, is it time for those trainings to be refreshed? Did anyone miss not getting a training? Has everyone gone through the training? Do we have documentation that they've gone through the training? And that's all important. So say there's somebody serving in your ministry and they have an allegation come up against them. If they come to you and say, we want to know exactly what you did to prevent this from happening, if you can open up something and show them, here's their application that they completed, here's their background check that we ran, here's the training that we required them to take, and they completed it, and here are the references we called, we have done our due diligence in preventing this from happening. They signed the document saying they were going to follow our policies and procedures. So it's important that not only you have these things in place, but that you can show proof that you have these things in place. Have there been any policy violations, incidents, or near misses in the year? Maybe you noticed someone pushing a boundary. Maybe somebody came to you and said, hey, I saw so and so twice this year. I caught them in the bathroom alone with a student, and they made up an excuse as to why they were there. Those kinds of things should be noted and documented so you can look for patterns to see, okay, it may be time to excuse somebody from serving in the ministry. Or maybe something happened and you're like, ugh, our policy doesn't really work well for that. We should probably look at updating our policy on that. So thinking through some of those things, has anything happened in the year that we need to take a look at, maybe adjust our policies? Digital communication policies, that's really big, especially with our youth leaders. Our kids like to communicate through social media, through texting, but we've got to, again, think through those things and how do we do that safely? I usually even say on texting to make sure that you follow the 2 adult rule, that there's some accountability on there, including somebody else on your text as you're texting, and even getting permission from parents. Some parents may not want the youth leader texting, one-on-one texting with their student. What are the parameters, hours of day that these communications can go out? So making sure that there's something in there for that and you're constantly staying up to date with what's happening, which everything is happening very, very, very fast. So another reason to look at these policies every year. Number 15, are policies accessible and clearly communicated to staff and volunteers? Just making sure, hey, we just want to put this in front of you again this year. As a reminder for our policies, you may want to have them sign off on it every year. Or there may come changes and say, hey, we've had a couple changes to the policies. We just want to make you aware these are the changes that we made. Same with the next one, have all the volunteers signed off on agreeing to the policies and procedures. You may say, oh, we forgot to show, we forgot to have our new volunteer sign the policies and procedures document. So here's where you can kind of catch those things that may have fallen through the cracks. And then lastly, implementation and alignment. And this is where you kind of look at, are our policies being followed as written? So many times I go to a church or they'll ask me to review their policies and I'll see this highly detailed bathroom policy. And I'll say, is this what you really do? Do all your volunteers follow this bathroom policy? And they'll say, well, no, this is actually how we do it. Well, if the way you're actually doing it is a safe way, then make your policy reflect that. So making sure your policies are being followed as they're written. You also don't want them to be so detailed that people can't think for themselves. And so that's another, I did see a church policy that was so incredibly detailed that they didn't know whether, can I open the door? Can I close the door? Can I go to the bathroom? I can't go to the bathroom now. So we don't want to make them where they have no freedom to move as also. And that kind of leads into 18. Are there areas where our practice differs from our policy? And the case may be that the policy needs refined, or maybe the volunteers just need a refresher. Hey, just a reminder, this is how we take kids to the bathroom. It could be that. 19, have we gotten any feedback from leadership staff or parents or a congregation member that might be considered? A parent may say, hey, I noticed this. If you had a policy that said this, it might be an easy way to prevent these things from happening. So, or a staff member, a volunteer may say, hey, I noticed this. This might be a good policy we could institute. The policy on parents staying in the classroom, that actually happened when I was in ministry. We didn't have a policy like that, and we had a family come and they had a little girl and they wanted to stay with her throughout the entire ministry. It was a Sunday night ministry. And the grandfather and the mother would sit with the child throughout the entire ministry, and she would travel. It was a rotational model, almost like a VBS ministry. They would go room to room and they would stay with all the children. And a volunteer came up to me and said, hey, they're here every night and they're in a room just like all of our screened volunteers. They should probably be screened as well because we know nothing about the grandfather or the mother. And so that therein evolved a new policy that we created that said you can stay and watch 2 times. And after that, if you want to continue to stay in the room with other people's children, you'll need to go through the same screening process as all the other adults in the room. So sometimes suggestions from your volunteers and staff are helpful and can lead to additional policies. And then lastly, do they adequately address inclusion, medical needs, allergies, accommodations for children and vulnerable individuals? Is the last piece of that. And then on the bottom, just making sure you document any changes that get made, making sure you record the annual review meeting so that there's clear notes on that. Updating your policy revision date, which is usually on the bottom. So if you post your policies on your website and somebody looks at that, they can look at that date on the bottom and say, oh, this was just revised, or they don't want to see this was last revised in 1982. So the fresher the policies are, the more that it reflects that the culture is a culture of safety. Did you communicate any changes to your staff and volunteers? And do you need to schedule any necessary trainings or follow-up actions with that? So those are some a good, helpful gauge for how to go through a policy annual review. It gives you a document to follow step by step to sit down with some of your leaders and say, let's take a look at what we have. Let's go through this worksheet together and see where we have some gaps and where we might need to button things up from there. So that was a lot of information and a lot of talking. So
Oh,
any
that's good.
questions? I can share the slides. Hopefully you can download that document that we were just looking at together. I can also send you a sample policy and procedures document if you want to compare against what you have. Would be helpful for you. I can do that as well too. So anyway,
How do we make that connection with you for you to send us both of those pieces?
sure. Let me see. Let me put my email and phone number in the chat. Would that help? Um,
We can also have those added to the recording for the Montgomery Baptist Association, and Kris can send them to you too.
yeah. You can, and that phone number is my cell number. So you can text me, you can call me, you can send me an email and say, hey, can you send me your slides or the annual review document or a sample policy to look off of? Um, so yeah, I know it seems like a lot, and especially for some of our small churches, I know it falls a lot of times in the pastor's lap. And a lot of it is not something training that you got in seminary, so it can be difficult. Um, but maybe there's a person in your church, they don't necessarily have to be the kids ministry director or the youth ministry director. Maybe this is just a place where they can serve. Maybe they want to serve your kids ministry, but they don't want to be literally knee to knee with other children. This is a good way that they could help if they were to become a child safety coordinator, and they take this on as almost like it's its own ministry in and of itself. But yeah, I'm here at BCMD to help if you say, hey, we really need this policy. I don't really know how to word it. Feel free to reach out to me. Also, I do a lot of policy reviews for churches. If you just want to send me your policy and say, here's what we have, where do we have some gaps, or where do you see where we might be missing something that we should add? I'm happy to do that too.
I might add that this has been an emphasis across the Southern Baptist Convention, and Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware really has provided a model for our whole convention in many ways. And I know Keith Meyer has been very influential in that, along with Kris, and making sure not only that our policies are in place, but many states are modeling after what is being done here. So I appreciate Kris and Keith and all the persons working on this, because it's like that old saying that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. These are, we don't want to get into legal matters, with problems with these if we could prevent anything. And I know often what I hear in churches when something has happened is people will say, "Oh, I never thought that would ever happen to us."
Yeah.
Well, it can to any church, anybody, and not only things that could happen, but even accusations that could happen can cause problems. So to have all this in place, this is a legal document that if anything ever gets into court, you have a legal document to back you up that you've done background checks, that you've done all these things. So it's not just an optional thing; it's something that's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will share, I am working, I'm a official PhD candidate at Southwestern Seminary. So I'm
Mm.
looking at our dissertation being actually that our state as a model for other states implementing a change in their constitution and bylaw. And does that effectively create more safe churches in your state convention? So stay tuned for that.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good. Anybody else have a question? Uh, One thing I would like you to say something on, Kris, is the need for adequate liability insurance. A lot of churches may not know that they don't have adequate insurance, liability insurance.
Yeah, and I'm no insurance expert by any means. But yes, adequate and having adequate insurance is one thing, but also making sure that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing for that coverage to be in effect. I do know sometimes there have been instances where a church made an outside report of abuse, and then that circled back around and ended up having its day in court. And since the church never notified the insurance company that an
Mhm.
outside report was made, their insurance coverage was null and void. So it's really important. We like to make sure we have it and how much money does it cover, but we also need to pay just as much attention to what are the things we need to be doing to make sure that they're actually going to cover us.
And as you
And
said too, some of
Ron,
these insurance companies give actually uh, a lot of questions, just like you've done here, of what they need.
Yeah. And a lot of them have really great resources like Church
Mhm.
Mutual, Brotherhood. Brotherhood has an excellent website that has sample policies you can download. Very, very
Mhm.
helpful.
and Ron,
Mhm.
can you hear me? Uh, Prince George Baptist Association will be having a insurance expert in churches on
Ooh.
February the 18th. I will send that out to all of you.
Okay.
Your association. I just talked to them tonight, and we're gonna get this a try out. It's gonna be by way of Zoom.
Very good.
Hey, Marcus, is there one specific insurance company that's going to be represented?
We use Guide One,
Okay, good. Yeah, that would be really good.
and that was one of the things we were talking about along with some other stuff. I'll send that information as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the week.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Uh, I want to remind you that our next meeting, Zoom meeting, training meeting, will be on March the 30th. We're going to be moving it to Monday night. There are a number of people that have other types of meetings that have developed on Tuesday night, but our next meeting is March the 30th at 7 o'clock. And one of the things I'm working on is at First Baptist Church of Rockville. Uh, Pastor Alan Acker and Carlos Camargo, um, uh, their praise team leader, they have been using a computer translation program that will help any language of anybody that of any language could come to church and plug into that through their cell phone or through headphones, and it will translate the message into their language. It's a very revolutionary game changer kind of thing. So that's one thing we're working on to do next meeting, and we're later on wanting to do something on revitalization. But if you're not on our church newsletter mailing list, let Melanie or I know so we can put you on our mailing list. And then please share those um, newsletters with your church members so they'll know what's going on in association and our state convention. We certainly cooperate with our state convention on everything that we do. Any other questions before we close or?
Ron, just to mention one thing about Carlos and them, that translation, and Duplav, you might want to hear this. That translation happens real time. They did a demonstration,
Yeah.
And when they were speaking Spanish, it was translating to English almost immediately, instantly. So the person in the church is not feeling out of place because he's 30 seconds behind. It really is. It's a wonderful piece of equipment for anybody. We have a Korean family that we really will enjoy this in our church. And the main thing is, they won't hear everybody laughing and 30 seconds later figure out why. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's good, and it's revolutionary in the sense that certainly we want to start churches for different language groups, but this also opens it to a new growth area for churches to reach any language group through their worship services. Okay, any other questions before we close then?
Hey, I don't have a question, but one thing I want to point out here, we got Deplave. He's online with us, and we need to congratulate him on the birth of his recent child.
Okay, yeah. Congratulations, Deeplav.
Thank you so much.
Deeplav's he's our latest church planter, reaching Asian English speaking in the Rockville area and all around that area. So,
what's the name of your church?
The name we give is Christ Vision International Church.
Okay.
And what's the name of your child?
Sorry, I missed it.
No, what's the name of your child?
Her name is Sarah with an H.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Very good.
So she's crying at the background.
Yeah, I noticed that. Notice that. That's I told Deeplav this is his first church member.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we love our church planters and believe very much in church planting, and along with that, strengthening our churches. And we just want to help the churches in any way we can. And just let us know if we can help you in any way. Both association and state convention, we're all together in our work together. Thank you, Kris, for coming and sharing with us tonight. This is very helpful, and we will make sure that this recording goes on the MBA website, and when you send the PowerPoint, that will be connected with that. And as Kris said, any help that you need in reviewing policies or if you sample policies, just let her know. Any closing thoughts anyone has? Okay, well, let's close in prayer. And Kevin, could you close us tonight in prayer?
I'll be honored to. Thank you. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for all that you do for us and watching over us. And I thank you for the men and women of our churches who work so diligently to present your word. And Father, we know that unfortunately, the world we live in today, policies, just like we discussed this evening, are so necessary, not only for ourselves, but for others, and especially for our children. And so, Father, I just pray that you help give each of us wisdom in knowing the right things to do, the right policies to put in place, and Father, just to be even using this to glorify you. Thank you for Kris. I thank you for Ron for putting these training sections on for us. And we ask, Lord, as we leave here now, that you just give us a good evening. And we thank you for all you do for us. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, good night, everybody. God bless.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Kris. Thank you,
Thank
Ron.
you.
Thank you, everybody.